There's a kind of man the world rarely notices anymore. He doesn't shout his opinions online. He doesn't chase validation. He doesn't fill his schedule with noise. Most evenings, you'll find him sitting in a quiet room, maybe with a cup of coffee cooling beside him, staring out the window as if the world outside has nothing left to prove. He isn't sad, he isn't broken, he's just at peace. But peace, in our time, has become suspicious. When a man retreats from the crowd, society assumes something is wrong. They call him antisocial, distant, maybe even depressed, because we've built a world that worships noise and condemns silence. Yet silence isn't emptiness, it's presence distilled. It's the space where a man finally hears himself think. Think about it. Every hour of your day is invaded by notifications, opinions, endless information. You scroll, respond, react, and somewhere in that endless motion, your sense of self dissolves. But when the noise fades, something ancient wakes up. The man who finds peace in silence, isn't running away from life, he's walking back to it. He's not rejecting people, he's reclaiming energy. He's not lonely, he's selective. Maybe you've felt it too. That quiet joy of staying home when everyone else is out chasing the next distraction. That strange calm that comes from doing nothing and realizing nothing was missing. But why do some men crave silence while others fear it? Why do certain minds thrive in solitude while others drown in it? What happens inside a man when he stops trying to be heard and starts learning to listen? In this exploration, we'll dive deep into the psychology of a man who finds peace in silence. The biological roots, the emotional mechanisms, and the philosophical meaning behind his choice to withdraw from the world's noise. We'll uncover what silence does to the brain, how solitude rewires masculine emotion, and why, in an overstimulated world, some men are quietly evolving into something stronger, something the crowd can't understand. Because maybe silence isn't weakness, maybe it's evolution. And the men who learn to embrace it are simply adapting to a world that forgot how to breathe. 1. The world of constant noise. We live in a culture that confuses stimulation with meaning. Every second demands our attention. Headlines, voices, screens, expectations. The man who steps back from it isn't escaping, he's detoxing. Silence becomes his rebellion. It's not passive, it's an act of defiance against a system that measures worth by visibility. In silence, he says, I do not need to be seen to exist. Psychologically, this shift reflects what researchers call sensory fatigue, the exhaustion caused by constant input. When the brain is bombarded, cortisol rises, attention fragments, and emotional regulation collapses. But silence repairs what noise destroys. Studies show that just 2 hours of quiet each day can regenerate neurons in the hippocampus, the center of memory and emotion. That's why, for this man, silence isn't boredom, it's healing. He's not hiding from life, he's metabolizing it. 2. The introverted core. Not every man who loves silence is introverted, but most have learned to draw power from solitude. Introversion isn't shyness. It's the preference for low-stimulation environments where thought runs deeper. Carl Jung described introverts as those who turn their energy inward. In today's world, that inward turn is radical. Society rewards extroversion. The louder, faster, more social you are, the more successful you appear. But many men eventually realize that external validation comes at an internal cost. When he stops performing for approval, the silent man discovers clarity. Without the constant echo of others' opinions, his own voice returns, slower, wiser, stripped of noise. He doesn't fear being misunderstood anymore. He simply no longer requires to be understood by everyone. Silence, then, becomes not isolation, but alignment. 3. The neurochemistry of peace. Peace isn't just an emotion, it's a chemical state. When a man spends time in quiet, the brain releases serotonin and oxytocin, balancing the nervous system. Heart rate slows, cortisol levels fall. The body literally recalibrates in modern psychology. This is linked to the parasympathetic nervous response, the rest and digest mode. Men who are constantly pressured to act, achieve, compete, live trapped in the opposite. The fight or flight loop. Silence breaks that loop. It's why a walk alone at dusk feels medicinal. Why turning off the phone can feel like lifting a physical weight. Why solitude doesn't just calm, it rebuilds. Silence gives the masculine mind what society never does: permission to stop performing, and in that stillness, The nervous system whispers, "You're safe now." 4. The masculine search for control. Men are taught that strength means dominance over circumstances, over chaos. But real control often hides inside surrender. In silence, a man surrenders the illusion that he can fix everything. He stops trying to control the world and learns to govern his inner weather. This is psychological maturity. According to Erik Erikson's stages of development, mature identity emerges when one moves from external achievement to internal meaning. Silence catalyzes that shift. It separates the man who acts from impulse from the man who acts from understanding. He realizes that stillness doesn't weaken his edge, it sharpens it. The same man who once chased validation through noise now channels his focus like a blade. He works better. He listens deeper. He speaks less, but when he does, people listen. 5. The echo of childhood for many men. Peace and silence is not newly learned, it's remembered. As boys, they found safety in quiet corners, drawing, reading, building worlds in their minds. Then society arrived with its megaphone. Be louder, be tougher, be more. They obeyed until one day the noise became unbearable. Psychologists call this environmental incongruence, when your external life contradicts your inner rhythm. Silence realigns the two. The man returns to the tempo that once made him feel alive. He realizes that silence isn't emptiness, it's the natural state before the world demanded noise. 6. The spiritual dimension. Every major philosophy, from Stoicism to Zen, treats silence as sacred. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." Modern men rediscover that truth without even naming it spirituality. When he sits in silence, he practices an ancient discipline, contemplation. His thoughts slow until they become transparent. He begins to see his fears, desires, and regrets not as enemies, but as signals. This is mindful solitude, and neuroscience supports it. Meditative silence increases gray matter in regions linked to empathy and self. It's why men who practice solitude often become calmer, wiser, less reactive. They move from doing to being. And in that being, peace blooms. 7. Society's misunderstanding, yet society doesn't know what to do with a quiet man. We mistake stillness for sadness, boundaries for detachment. In workplaces, silence is seen as weakness. In relationships, it's misread as indifference. But often, the quiet man is the one holding the emotional architecture together. He observes before reacting. He listens before deciding. He carries storms inside, but releases them only when they can no longer harm. Psychologically, such men demonstrate high emotional regulation, a trait linked to resilience and leadership. The tragedy is that our culture rewards noise, not depth. So the silent man walks misunderstood, while secretly mastering what others avoid, himself. 8. Relationships and boundaries. In love, his silence can confuse partners who equate communication with constant talking. But his quiet isn't distance, it's digestion. He processes emotions inwardly, like a craftsman carving meaning before speaking. When arguments arise, he pauses. That pause is his power. Inside it, he decides whether to respond from ego or clarity. Therapists describe this as metacognition, thinking about one's own thoughts. Few practice it. The silent man lives it. He may seem detached, but his silence is often the loudest form of respect. He refuses to wound with words he'll later regret. 9. Creativity born from quiet silence isn't only refuge, it's a forge. Many of history's most profound ideas emerged from solitude. Newton's theory under a quiet tree, Beethoven composing in deafness, monks transcribing wisdom in stone monasteries. When the external world pauses, the internal world awakens. The man who finds peace in silence often becomes intensely creative. He sees patterns others miss. He turns boredom into imagination. Cognitive psychology calls this incubation, the mind's ability to generate insight during rest. That's why many men have their best ideas while driving alone or sitting in darkness. The mind, freed from noise, begins to whisper truth. 10. Silence as healing. For some, silence becomes therapy. After heartbreak, betrayal, or burnout, noise feels violent. So he withdraws, not to avoid pain, but to process it privately. This withdrawal mirrors trauma recovery cycles: safety, stabilization, reflection, reintegration. Silence occupies the middle too. In the quiet, he reorganizes memories, makes sense of chaos, and reemerges grounded. Its people may call it avoidance, but healing often looks like absence before rebirth, like winter before spring. 11. The freedom from performance. The most profound transformation occurs when he realizes he no longer owes the world a version of himself. He doesn't need to prove masculinity through dominance, nor value through productivity. Silence strips him of social costume. He becomes invisible, and paradoxically, in that invisibility, he becomes real. He learns to value being over-appearing. Psychologically, this is called self-authorship, the stage where a man defines his values internally rather than through external approval. The reward is immense: peace without permission. 12. Modern isolation versus intentional solitude. But let's draw a line between two similar yet opposite states: isolation, forced, lonely, unhealthy; solitude, chosen, restorative, empowering. Isolation drains, solitude fills. Isolation says, "No one wants me." Solitude says, "I need time to return to myself." The man who finds peace in silence has learned that distinction. He uses solitude as medicine, not punishment. He doesn't cut the world off, he calibrates his connection to it. This is the hallmark of emotional intelligence: knowing when to engage and when to retreat. 13. The return to the world eventually. He steps back out, not as the same man who entered the silence, but as one tempered by it. He listens more, speaks less, judges slower. He's less reactive to manipulation, marketing, and noise. Friends might say, "You've changed." He smiles, because they're right. He didn't become colder. He became clear. 1. Silence as a psychological reset. When a man embraces silence, he is not escaping the world. He is resetting the mind that the world corrupted. Clinical psychologists often describe this as cognitive decompression. The mind's need to discharge excess stimulation before regaining focus. In silence, brainwave patterns shift from the fast, anxious beta state to the slower alpha and theta states, which foster imagination, empathy, and memory consolidation. That's why a quiet evening alone can feel like both rest and revelation. It isn't idleness, it's maintenance. And maintenance is the discipline of men who intend to last. 2. Masculinity without noise. The traditional model of masculinity rewards volume. Louder opinions, stronger posture, faster hustle. But true masculine power matures into quiet certainty. In silence, a man begins to sense how little of his energy ever belonged to him. He recalls all the arguments he fought just to be heard, all the compromises made for approval. Then he recognizes that the calm he feels alone is not weakness, it's ownership. Stoic philosophy called this autarkia, self-sufficiency of the soul. Modern psychology calls it internal locus of control. The belief that one's peace depends on one's own mind, not external chaos. A man who internalizes this becomes immune to manipulation. Society can shame him, praise him, tempt him, but it can no longer steer him. 3. Why modern men seek silence. Our era is the loudest in human history. Information never sleeps, dopamine never rests, and attention is the new currency. Each scroll, ping, and notification is a microdose of stimulation that rewires the reward system. Over time, men feel scattered, mentally fragmented across dozens of digital lives. Silence becomes a biological countermeasure. When he puts down the phone, he isn't being antisocial. He's reestablishing neurological sovereignty. He's choosing serotonin over dopamine, contentment over excitement. This shift explains why many men who once chased nightlife now prefer quiet mornings, black coffee, and a walk. The high of noise fades fast. The peace of silence endures. For emotional processing and depth, men often process emotion differently from women, not less deeply, but less verbally. In a culture that demands constant emotional expression, his silence is misread as repression. Yet psychology shows that reflection without expression can be equally healthy if it leads to insight. Inside silence, men replay experiences, re-edit memories, and integrate lessons. Neuroscientists call this default mode network activation the brain's introspective system. When you see a man staring into space, he may look detached, but his mind is archiving, connecting, forgiving. That is not detachment, it is digestion. 5. The fear of silence. Most people fear silence because silence confronts them with themselves. It removes distraction and forces dialogue with the subconscious, a conversation many avoid for decades. For men conditioned to equate worth with productivity, stillness feels like death. But in truth, it is rebirth. When he finally sits alone, he meets the voices he buried, the regrets, the doubts, the forgotten dreams. At first, they roar, then they whisper, then they quiet. This confrontation is psychologically cleansing. It's why monks meditate, soldiers reflect, and thinkers isolate. Peace follows exposure. 6. Relationships reimagine silence reshapes how a man loves. He no longer seeks partners to fill emptiness. He seeks resonance because he knows now peace cannot be outsourced. In relationships, he offers depth instead of drama. He listens not to reply, but to understand. And when he chooses space, it isn't rejection, it's self-regulation. Therapists note that emotionally mature men use solitary regulation to prevent projection. They process emotions privately before re-entering dialogue. This prevents conflict escalation and fosters stability. So, the silent man doesn't communicate less, he communicates cleaner. 7. The economy of attention. Consider attention as currency. Every scroll, argument, or unnecessary interaction is a withdrawal. Silence is saving. When he guards his attention, he becomes wealthy in focus. And focus compounds like interest. It produces mastery, creativity, spiritual growth. Economists study scarcity. Philosophers study meaning. The silent man understands both. Scarcity of noise creates meaning in thought. That's why minimalism feels sacred. It restores significance to every sound that remains. 8. Solitude and self-dialogue. The longer he lives in silence, the clearer his internal voice becomes. What begins as reflection evolves into dialogue, a council of selves, the warrior, the boy, the thinker, the father. He learns to negotiate with his impulses rather than obey them. This inner communication mirrors the Jungian individuation process, the integration of the shadow and persona. The quiet man doesn't deny his darker emotions. He gives them space to speak, then disciplines them through understanding. As a result, his outward calm hides a complex inner democracy. He doesn't explode because every part of him has already been heard. 9. Silence as strength in a debate. The loudest voice dominates the moment. The quiet one controls the memory. Silence is strategy. It unsettles manipulation, diffuses conflict, commands respect. Military psychologists studying elite units often note a phenomenon called combat.com, trained silence under pressure. It's the discipline of men who act only when necessary. Everyday life offers its own battles, arguments, politics, ego wars. The silent man wins by refusing to play. His restraint is armor, his calm, a signal of mastery. 10. The shadow side, yet silence has limits. Left unchecked, it can harden into isolation, cynicism, or emotional numbness. Peace can turn into avoidance if a man hides indefinitely from human connection. The difference lies in intention. If silence is chosen for restoration, it heals. If chosen for escape, it corrodes. That's why balance matters. Solitude should prepare a man to re-enter life stronger, not vanish from it entirely. The goal isn't to reject the world, it's to return immune to its noise. 11. The cultural rebellion. Silence, in an age of oversharing, is rebellion. It terrifies systems built on engagement metrics and emotional manipulation. A man who no longer reacts cannot be controlled. Corporations sell him identity. Silence returns him to essence. Media floods him with outrage. Silence restores proportion. In a sense, he becomes post-consumer. He consumes less, but lives more. That's not laziness, that's liberation. 12. The evolution of masculine energy. Historically, masculinity was loud, conquest, expansion, assertion. But the modern evolution is inward. The new warrior fights distraction, not enemies. He conquers his impulses instead of territories. This quiet masculinity isn't passive, it's precise. It channels strength like a controlled flame, calm, contained, unstoppable. Philosophically, it echoes Taoism, the power of water, soft yet unstoppable. The man who finds peace in silence embodies this paradox. He bends, flows, endures. 13 lessons for the modern mind. What can we learn from him? That silence is not a luxury, but a necessity. That inner peace isn't discovered by adding, it's revealed by subtracting. That the mind, when unchained from constant noise, returns to its original intelligence. Psychology, spirituality, and philosophy converge here. Stillness is not emptiness. It's clarity, and clarity is the seat of wisdom. 14. Reflection, a message to the listener. If you, the listener, feel drained by constant noise, you're not broken. You're sensitive in a desensitized age. Your craving for quiet isn't weakness, it's intelligence. It's your nervous system pleading for equilibrium. So when you choose to stay home, to read, to sit in stillness, understand you're not withdrawing from life. You're preparing to meet it on your own terms. Let silence train you, the way storms train trees, deeper roots, calmer sway. Let solitude sharpen your presence, not erase it. And when you finally re-enter the noise, carry the silence with you like armor, because in a world addicted to volume, peace is the rarest sound of all. There comes a point in a man's life when he realizes that peace was never out there. It was always waiting inside the quiet he kept avoiding. You can chase noise your whole life, applause, attention, affection, and still feel hollow when the world finally goes silent. Because real peace doesn't arrive when life gets easier. It arrives when you stop demanding that it does. Silence is not the absence of sound, it's the presence of truth. And when a man learns to sit with that truth, unfiltered, unmasked, unhurried, he becomes unshakable. In that stillness, the ego dissolves, and what remains is presence. Simple, powerful, alive. He no longer seeks validation because he no longer feels incomplete. He no longer needs to argue because he no longer needs to win. He just is. That's the final evolution of masculine peace. Not dominance, not detachment, but quiet awareness. A man who can be alone without feeling lonely has mastered one of life's highest disciplines. Because peace, in the end, is not found in the absence of chaos, but in the ability to remain calm within it. So if you've ever felt guilty for needing time alone, if you've ever been told you're too quiet, too distant, too different, remember this: the world may not understand you, but silence does, and maybe that's enough. Maybe peace isn't about escaping the world. Maybe it's about returning to it so calm, so centered, that nothing can take that silence from you again. So tonight, turn off the noise. Sit with your own breathing. Let your thoughts slow down until the world softens around you. Because somewhere inside that stillness is the version of you the world can't manipulate, can't exhaust, can't break. That's the man who finds peace in silence, and that peace is his greatest power.